When I moved to England, when I was in my primary school, I can remember that we went to Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara. There was a program on that day, and Dad called me into the main hall to say, "You're having your turban tied today." I had the Turban ceremony. And I was fortunate that Vadde Babaji tied my dastar. I didn't know how important it was then. It's only later on it becomes important and poignant. I then, wearing a turban then became part of my identity. It was something that made me me. I then went to primary school in Highbury, and that was a difficult time because I was the only turban wearing student there, and I had difficulties whilst I was there because I wore a turban. In the 70s was a time where there was a lot of right-wing extremism. There used to be a political party called the National Front, and nowadays you hear about skinheads and punks and rockers and so forth, and that's when they were in their heyday. And going to school every morning, I can remember we had a school which was not but 200 yards from where we lived, but I wouldn't go there because it was so rough, so dangerous for me. I knew that I would suffer greatly there. So I used to have to take 2 buses. It used to take me about an hour to get to school. And I went to a school in Wood Green, which was equally as difficult because neither had I any support network, any other friends who were similar to me. Nobody in that school wore a turban except for me. And I had a very, very difficult time indeed. So it came as quite a relief that Vadde Babaji had said to Dad that you must move to Birmingham. And we moved to Birmingham, and Dad wanted to source a good education for me. He said that it was his duty to provide me with a good education. I then ended up going to a school where I had to take an entrance exam. That school was Park Grove School, and I remember it now. The headmaster's room now is where the Priory Hospital is, and it's still in existence. And I can remember we had an entrance exam, and that I took in the headmaster's room, and he said, he told my dad that I'd passed the entrance exam, but told Dad that if I wanted to go to the school, I would have to cut my hair and get rid of my turban. Well, at that stage, Dad was a practicing solicitor in Birmingham, and he tried to reason with the headmaster as to that wasn't really appropriate because wearing a turban was part of our identity. And as a result, he should reconsider it. He suggested that I would wear a turban the same color as the school uniform, and gave examples such as the army, the navy, where you had practicing Sikhs who wore a dastar that was the same color as the uniform to integrate. He said he would think about it, but then after he thought about it, he came to the conclusion that he felt that a lot of parents would object to a turban wearing student coming to the school and would take their children away, and decided to refuse my admission. Dad thought that that was an important matter to take on board, because if, as a lawyer, he didn't do anything about it, then, as had happened before, many Sikhs who were turban wearing, who wanted to go to that school, ended up cutting their hair. And he felt that that was wrong in principle, and he knew it was wrong in law. And as a lawyer, he thought that it was his duty, his moral duty, to try and do something about it. So he, despite the persuasion, the headmaster wouldn't relent, so we had to commence legal proceedings. And we had a very bright barrister, Singh, a turban-wearing barrister who studied his bar finals at the same time as Dad came to England in 1956. And he was the barrister who argued the case. In the lower courts, we lost, and they came to the conclusion that we weren't discriminated against, and the headmaster was entirely within his rights to refuse admission. Dad decided that this matter needed to go further, so he appealed. The matter then went to the Court of Appeal, and there was a very famous judge called Lord Denning. He used to be the Master of the Rolls. He actually retired when he was 99. This was his last judgment, and he equated Sikhs as a cult, similar to Moonies and Gypsies and such like, and hippies, and also came to the conclusion that we hadn't been discriminated against. Dad came to a conclusion that he's tried all his might and he can't deal with this matter any further, so he went to Babaji to say, this is the problem, I've tried my hardest, I've tried all the legal avenues and I can't assist, and I'm now passing this baton on to you for your assistance and guidance, for you to try and resolve this issue. Babaji decided to organize a march which took place in Hyde Park, a march which Sikhs from all up and down the country came to and took part in. I think there were about 80,000 Sikhs from up and down the country who came. Bhai Narang Singh Ji assisted in organizing langar for everybody, and a petition was then handed in to the Prime Minister, who was at that stage Margaret Thatcher. The matter was progressed by it going to the House of Lords. In the House of Lords, there was a barrister who had been instructed, who was Mr. Irving. He later on became the Lord Chancellor. And it was a case that the Law Lords decided overwhelmingly that the Sikhs had been discriminated against, and as a result they afforded the protection that was already in place under the Race Relations Act at the time. And the important point is that this decision would never have taken place had it not been for the intervention of Babaji and the Sikh Panth. I am simply, as Bhai Mohinder Singh usually introduces me as Exhibit 1A, and that is the only part that I played. I played no important part in it. I was simply the vehicle that carried the change forward. It was destined, I think, that Babaji tied my turban. It was destined that we moved to Birmingham. It was destined that I would be refused admission in that school. It was destined that my father would try his hardest and fail. It was destined that this is a matter which the Sikh Panth would then take on board, own it as their own, and deliver the outcome. And as a result of that decision, many laws have been passed based on that decision. And I think it's still taught as a leading case in universities even now. So, I have, thanks to Almighty God and the Jatha for the assistance that I could have rendered.